And yeah, you saw the clickbait. Is the Pope going to hell? That's a question. Is the Pope going to hell? And we're also going to talk about the greatest president of all time. The greatest president of all time when it comes to America. Okay, now we know that Pope Francis has deceased on Easter, a day after seeing and meeting with the Republican Vice President J.D. Vance. Okay, now it is what it is. So the question is the Pope going to hell? And you individuals who are tapping in, I'm going to need you to put your opinion in the comments because it is a question. And the question is the Pope going to hell? Because if anybody would be held to a higher standard, it would be the Pope. Okay, and according to the Bible, and I'm just going to go ahead and kick it off because Jesus said in Matthew 5:20, "For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." That's exactly what it says. And the scribes and Pharisees of today are your Democrats and Republicans, or one could say your conservatives and your liberals. So is the Pope going to hell? If anybody should be held to a standard, it has to be the Pope. So when we talk about these things, sometimes we got to have these conversations. It's not good. Sometimes you are forced to talk about things that you don't want to talk about because we know that the world and how it functions, it comes with these grand distractions. Okay, because over the Easter weekend, I was invited to parties and they were saying, "Hey, Glove, man, it's 420 today. It's 420 today." And I've had to let them know, like, no, it's Easter. We're celebrating Easter, but most people were celebrating 420, which is okay. But we got to have these conversations because, Pope Francis, like I said, has perished. And my question to the listeners and to the world is Pope Francis going to hell? Because according to Matthew 5:24, I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And that goes for you and I. Okay. And God shows grace. But when you are a leader, a religious leader, you are held to a higher standard. Okay. And clearly the fear of God is more important than the fear of man, because I believe we get it twisted because the Pope, he pretty much folded to the scribes and Pharisees and pushed an agenda to pretty much put himself in a purgatory type position, because you can't go against God when you profess that you are a religious leader and you are, in control, and you have to show yourself different, because according to the Bible, we have to have more righteousness than the scribes and the Pharisees if we claim to be men and women of God. But the agenda that the Pope, the agenda that the Pope promoted, the Rainbow Coalition, okay, is he going to get that for pretty much being a, not a revolutionary, but a progressive Pope? Because it's quite strange for the first Latin Pope to be selected is the individual that pretty much changed of the Catholic Church. And you got to be honest with yourself, because he literally changed the fate of the Catholic Church. And it's always the outsider that they use. It's always the outsider, just like Obama. Obama was the first black president, but was the first one to, push a rainbow coalition or a different type of agenda. Think about that. Why is it, when they pick somebody and you're the first, your task is to pretty much, condemn and destroy what was built to create avenues for unrighteousness, just like the Bible says. "For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." And like I said, now the Pope has to be held to a higher standard. And for him to be the first Latin descent Pope, okay, this is why, in my mind, that he was compromised. Because when you're the first of anything, you owe favors to the individuals that put you in office, just like Obama owed favors to whoever put him in office. And he was the first president to, fly the rainbow flag, to promote an agenda. And now have a president right now that's pretty much repealing and replacing everything that they put into place. So when I sit back and say, who's the greatest president of all time, I'm going to get to that. But I'm asking you who are tapping out, is the Pope going to hell? Think about it. the agenda, the rainbow agenda. Think about it. Is he going to hell? Like I said, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm a human being and no sin is greater than the next. But there are some sins that classified as abominations. So there is levels to this. But the word of God says, and I'm going to share this with you because you have to hear this and understand, because the Pope is the Pope. And the rule book for the Pope, I got the Pope's playbook here, and that's the Bible. And in the Bible, the playbook that the Pope is supposed to adhere to, it says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." So I'm saying is the Pope going to hell? Think about it. Because the progressive agenda that he's promoted, the first Latin descent was compromised, just like Obama, the first black, was compromised. And this is not clickbait. It's a real question. It's a real concern. Is the Pope going to hell? And we know the issues that the Catholic Church has. The Catholic Church has spent billions of dollars, from PDF files and billions of dollars in class action lawsuits and things of that nature. So is it a religious organization or is it a political organization? And I'm going to say it's political because Joe Biden, the former president of the United States, basically went on record and said, "I'm Catholic." And I understand that. But we got to have this conversation, because if the Pope is compromised and he's not going by the rule book as a religious leader, then we have to really be and understand that we're going to have to tap into God ourselves and not rely on these middle men and these middle people, because they're compromised. And then when I sit back and you looked at it's not clickbait. When you look at it, said, "Is the Pope going to hell?" And then it says, who's the greatest president of all time? Okay. The greatest president of all time. And before I get to that, Ray M put in there, Jesus and Moses believed in one God, not the organized religions of Judaism and Christianity that later developed. So I'm going to say Ray basically saying the Pope, might not be going to heaven because he is compromised because of things have changed. And this is why we got to get back to just the one God. And this is why I'm using the Bible to defend my narrative, because it's written in red. And these are the words that came out of Jesus' mouth. And it says, "For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees." And contrary to popular belief, the scribes and Pharisees are today's Republicans and Democrats. Okay, "you will by no means see the kingdom of heaven." And this is why I do. Okay, because if we can't rely on our religious leaders, if we can't trust our religious leaders, if our religious leaders are compromised, just imagine how our politicians are compromised. Think about it. Think about it. So when I say the greatest president of all time, up until now, some would say Obama. Okay. Some would say Abe Lincoln, but Abe Lincoln was assassinated and his vision to fruition because he did not free the slaves. Okay. He put a Emancipation Proclamation, which is an acknowledgement of slavery. And they created a 13th Amendment, which has a slavery clause in it till this day. And the Democratic Party is and will always be the party of slavery. So think about it. Barack Hussein Obama could be classified as one of the greatest presidents of all time. Okay. But he's in competition because right now, I'm going to throw a curveball, okay, and some controversy, because right now he's tied with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is only not even 100 days in to his second term. Think about that. Now, Obama was hope, that hope and change. Obama was the hope president, meaning he gave us some hope. He made us feel good. He talked right. He said the right things. But if you really understand what was really going on, Obama was pretty much sent more immigrants back to their than any president in American history. And I remember under the Trump administration, they were using pictures of migrants with the blankets and in cages. And they put it and said this was what Donald Trump was doing. But that's what Obama was doing. Because if we can't trust the Pope, the supposed to be the religious leader of the world, how can we trust our elected officials? And it's about trust. Okay, because we're supposed to be trusting God. And if we're going to trust God, we're going to have to adhere to the same rules and the same rule book, because the word of God says, "For I say to you that if the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees is more than the people who are called by my name. And I'm going to say it, for I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Scribes and Pharisees, you will not see the kingdom of heaven. So I want to go to heaven. So I can't sit back and trust the Pope who pretty much says same-sex marriage is okay. I can't Pope who basically says that, men sleeping with men is okay, when the book of Leviticus says that it's an abomination and their blood should be upon them. Okay, the Bible talks about abominations only 3 times in that Bible. So some sins are worse than the next. Okay, so let's be honest. But God gives us a way of escape, and it's through repentance and sanctification. And repentance is basically repenting of your sins, making anew, not going back to what you do, and separate yourself from that you used to be and be a better person. So it's possible that the Pope got right with God before he transitioned. It's possible. Okay, but the agenda that he put out, he was compromised because he promoted a liberal democratic agenda. Think about that. And this is why the Catholic Church is seeming to be more of a political organization, not a religious org, because religion causes division, and we're supposed to be practicing relationship. Okay, because like I said, ye without sin cast the first stone. Nobody's throwing stones here. My walk is my walk. Your walk is your walk. So, but what I'm saying is we cannot support individuals and entities that are leading God's people to hell, because the agenda that the Pope put the Catholic Church on was detrimental to not only the religion, but to human beings who really don't know, and human beings who trust these organizations, just like, with molestation and PDF files, these kids and children, they trust. And this is why they grew to a whole nother issue. And then they grow up thinking that they're doing something right when they've been taught wrong the whole time. So we really got to understand. Let me see here. Ray M jumped in. Let me see here. The first president of the United States was not George Washington, but a black man named John Henson. Okay, we know the history. Totally understand. Okay, but in terms of documentation, he's really not documented as, but you're on to something. I've read that, but in a sense of understanding the effectiveness when it comes to leadership and presidencies, George Washington was documented as the first. Okay, as the Revolutionary at Abraham Lincoln supposedly signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which basically is just an acknowledgement, because contrary to popular belief, black men, the black race is still slaves here in the United States. And this is why there's a great separation away from the Democratic Party, because when the black man, had issues, they came up with the 94 crime bill, which was written which was promoted by Joe Biden. He signed into law by Bill Clinton. And then mass incarceration is a form of slavery, because the Constitution says, no involuntary servitude unless criminalized. So the Vagrancy Act of 1866 criminalized the newly freed slaves and pretty much rounded them up, put them on a ball and chain, and pretty much rebuilt the South on 100% free labor. And that's real. Okay. But in the sense of the greatest presidents of all time, and I'm going in modern history because Barack Hussein Obama was the first black president, but he practiced these same principles and the rudiments as the Pope. Okay. Pretty much was a scribe. So you can't really hurt him for that. But the Pope should know better, because God will punish individuals worse who know better, who are put in a position of responsibility for the people. So now we got to look and understand what's really going on, because when I look at the presidency right now, they left an opening for Donald J. Trump to be the greatest president of all time. And let me give this disclaimer. I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't support MAGA, none of that. I'm an American, nonpartisan independent. I'm a Native American who documents his history from Virginia for the year 1619. And we're pretty much going on 400. We pretty much has passed the threshold of the 400-year biblical curse here in America. It is what it is. But the Democratic parties put themselves out there to be for the people. But the Democratic Party has done so much damage, because every individual that has pretty much is an elected official from a Democratic perspective is compromised, just like the Pope was compromised. Why are we fighting for the rights of the people And the whole Democratic hook, line, and sinker on taking down the sitting president. And then they get an issue when he returns the favor and retaliates. I'm basically saying this is an opportunity for the American people to pretty much, right the wrongs of the past. The system's been broken a very long time. So now we're seeing a president that pretty much, Obama was the hope and change president. OK, but he looked at change as a noun, a person, place, or thing. But Trump is the change, and he's doing these things, and it's uncomfortable right now, but it really is, and it will be, and you all will see it play out, because there is a method to the madness, that is going to be the right thing to do. Because sometimes when you are operating on the wrong system, you have to, make decisions and do things comfortable that's different for people. But then you got to really understand that, in time, it gets better, because he's he's just, tinkering on 100 days in. He's just tinkering on 100 days, and it is what it is. OK, and you guys are in the comment. I got some of my, my believers, and I'm going to say believers because let me see here. Tina, put your hope in God only. Amen. And when Jesus talked about the work, he said he didn't come to change the scribe of the Pharisees, which is the Republicans and the Democrats. He also said, and this is why the question is the Pope going to hell? Because Matthew 5:20 says, "For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means see the kingdom of heaven." So this is the playbook that the Pope should have went by, but somehow, some way, he folded to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he put an agenda out there that's opposition of God. And this is why we have the issues that we have today, because you have some anti-American individuals. They don't love America. They're trying to tear it down. OK, they don't love it. They're the Antichrist. OK, and they're anti-American. So this is why we try to unify and come together and get outside of the two-party system and have conversations about the people. This is, they're demons. And then they go on attack mode, because if I were an elected official, like I said, more than likely I would be compromised as well. But since I'm not, I'm going to go ahead and step out on faith and work with the sitting president, because that no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, tax exempt for wage earners earning less than $150,000, a $5,000 stimulus from Doge for the frivolous spending, findings, and a $3,800 stimulus check from the federal government. This is what I would be working with. If I was an official, I would be trying to get this thing to a House vote, because if you did not know, no tax on tips, tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security has been introduced. OK, they just have to take it to a floor vote. But when you look at our Democratic elected officials, they're slapping a black man in the face, because when I look at the news and I see these Democratic officials, elected officials, going to bat for, these immigrants, going to bat for the MS-13 gang members, and, trying to stop people from going to jail, the not black people, but trying to stop the immigrants and migrants from going to jail, and going to El Salvador to try to get these individuals released. It hurts my heart, because I remember, the 94 crime bill. I remember, 3 strikes and you out. I remember, the felony for the crack rocks and all of this stuff. And then they just pretty much decapitated the black community. And then, when you talk to your people, your mothers, your uncles, your family members, and religious leaders, and it's about choice. You do the crime, you pay the time. OK, I've never seen a Democratic official go to even a county jail to try to get somebody released. But these individuals are leaving the country, go to El Salvador to try to retrieve individuals that was deported. And they sit back and says, "Oh, he's not a convicted gang member." OK, but he's documented. I saw the picture with the MS-13 and all the gang stuff on his hands and on his body, wearing the Bulls hat and all of this stuff. But somehow, some way, Democratic officials want to go all the way to El Salvador to pretty much try to get an individual out of jail that has been deported, who migrated to this country illegally. And then when I saw Trump of the gang tattoos and things like that. I was like, okay, that's. And then I'm scrolling and I saw another picture with his wife, and he was hugging her and she covered his hand and covered. So if I'm sitting here with a tattooed tear, okay, with gang stuff all over my face, it's an assumption that I'm a gang member. But when you look at these elected officials who are, pretty much, I don't know what back is up their back or what hand is up their back as a puppet, but we know without shadow of a doubt, they're getting paid to do these things because the Democrats is pretty much anti-American and they want to destroy this country. No disrespect to the elected officials the right way. No disrespect. But when I look at Congress and see these hoochie hoods in the form of Jasmine Crockett and, these old disrespectful individuals who pretty much are not fighting for the American citizens or the working class, also the middle class, but they pretty much want to take Trump down. And when you look at the news, where are these people? The only reason we see Cory Booker is because of the filibuster that he did. And that pretty much just went on deaf ears. Okay. Went viral for about a week or two. But what are the Democrats doing right now for the working class? And when I say the working class, that includes the middle class. Think about that. So this is why we, the people, have to step up. And this is why we, the people, have to, do what we have to do, because the Constitution says we, the people. These elected officials are pretty much compromised, just like the Pope was compromised. Is the Pope going to hell? The Bible in Matthew 5:20. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay. And this is the Pope's rule book. I'm reading it out of his manual. I'm reading it out of documents that the Pope is supposed to abide by. But for strange reason, he decided to, fold to the scribes and the Pharisees. Think about that. I understand the pressure. But when you finally elect a Pope of Latin descent, first time ever, this is how you can create that change. Just like Obama, the first black president ever outside of George Henson. But in modern history, look what he did. He ran on hope, gave us hope, but he changed the human anatomy. Okay. Same-sex marriage, transgenderism, men could play women's sports and all types of stuff. This is what the black man had to do because whoever in office gave him the rules that he had to abide by. And this is why, being an elected official might not be a good thing. This is why we, the people, have the power, because the Democratic Party, there is even the Democratic Party by the droves. The Democratic Party is done. And this is why they're hiring individuals to destroy Tesla. They're hiring individual tests and doing all of these things for what? Because they have nothing to stand on. We should be fighting for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, tax exemption for wage earners earning less than $1,000. We should be having conversations about tax reforms that's going to basically help the working and middle class. But we're not doing that. They're sitting here protesting the sitting president for I have no clue. You just going out and protesting to justify to your donors why you should get more money. And it's the craziest thing ever. The Pope perished on Easter. And think about over the Easter weekend. I'm looking at the news and Donald Trump protests all over the country. So they protesting Donald J. Trump on Easter. In their minds, look at what happened in the biblical days. If they're protesting Trump Easter weekend on Good Friday and Easter Sunday on Resurrection Sunday, they're protesting Donald Trump. Think about it. They're basically saying that he is the modern day Messiah. Let that sink in. They're basically saying that Donald J. Trump is today's modern day Messiah. You guys, Good Friday, you protested him. Saturday, you protested him. And on Resurrection Sunday, you spent millions of dollars protesting Donald J. Trump on Resurrection Sunday. Wow. And then they tried to blow his head off on national television. Think about it. Yeah, the Bible is a living document, and we got to get back on the right side of history, meaning we got to get back right with God. It is what it is. And somebody asked the question, Didi asked the question, have you ever seen a Bond gang member and gang tattoo doing well? No, absolutely not. But the Democratic Party, for whatever reason, because like I said, it's all money. It's all greed. I'm sure a shot caller, a higher power when it comes to, organized crime, basically, send a bag to the senator from Maryland, send a bag to these Congress people to go out there. I guarantee you, because greed is greed. And this is why the Democratic Party is done. It's a ghost of history's past. Because when I sit back and I talk to people and I says, the Democratic Party is the party of slavery, separated from the Union to preserve slavery, came up with the Vagrancy Act of 1866, which put a criminalization clause in the 13th Amendment, rounded up all the newly freed slaves and forced them to perform involuntary servitude to rebuild the South on free labor, as well as the individuals that was compromised, created sharecroppers. And then fast forward to the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, when it was supposed to be about race. They added everything under the Cis Lives organization, which includes white women, the gay movement, which includes white women, white men. Okay. And then they created the welfare system, snatched the black man out the household through crack, and then came up with a bill called the 94 Crime Bill, 3 striking you out. And that was Democratic. So I'm letting you know right now that the Democratic Party is the party of slavery, and it always will be, and it always will. And then individuals sit back and say, oh, no, it switched. No, it didn't switch. We're not going to transgender history. It didn't switch. OK, the party of slavery is the Democratic Party. OK, segregation, whites only was all in your southern states. And these are southern Democratic states till this day ran by Democrats. Just because you have a black face in a position of power does not mean that you're free and liberated, because this is what you call the coons and the Sambos. You can call me an Uncle Tom all day. As long as I'm not a coon and a Sambo, I'm a free black man speaking freedom, because like I said, this thing is bigger than me and is bigger than you. Because when you put a black person in power, that black person can only do what his handlers and his master tell them to do. If you look at any slave movie, Massa had black slaves in a house with him. Even the Science of Willie Lynch says, once we get the woman in the household with us, we can sleep at night, because she will protect Massa before she would even, protect her own father or biological brother. And it is what it is. So we got to really understand this is what we call the Great Separation. This is why 13 million Democrats decided to not show up at the polls or vote down ballot this time around. Think about it. And then you have a president who wants to make America great again. But he's basically got to do the dirty work that none of the presidents and before could do. Now, the tariffs is a good thing. OK, because if they're taxing us, we should tax them. Now, I'm an American citizen and Native American, so we got to basically make sure that America is first. If we outsource all of our energy, all of our jobs, and then when they cut us off, what are we going to do? Think about it. Let's have this conversation. It is what it is. It is what it is. And Trina Robinson put in, I tried to explain that to my friends and they refuse to listen. They choose to walk in the darkness. Listen, because this is the ecosystem that they created. Just understand the herd mentality. If we were a herd of sheep, all the sheep's going in the same direction. And if two break off, they looking at us as eyeballs like we don't know what we're doing. But we got a conscience. We have a conscience, a conscience. So this is why we got to sit still and hold fast and make sure, that we don't fold like the Pope. Make sure that we're not used like they used Obama to change the anatomy beam. Make sure that we stay right with God in the midst of everything that's going on, because Jesus left us a spot to fill. He said he didn't come to change the scribe or the Pharisees. He came to fulfill. And since he came for all of our sins, there has to be a special place of individuals that's going to stand in the gap and call out the scribes and the Pharisees, which is the Republicans and Democrats. Because I don't like when I see a Democrat official, talk about, taking down a human being because it's not flesh and blood. I want my elected officials to pretty much go to bat for the working class, because for the first time in our lifetimes, we get an opportunity to go to bat for the working class as independents, because it says we the people. And then 4 years later, if they want our vote, we have terms and conditions, creating the largest swing voter bloc in the history of the world, because the Democratic Party has shown itself. It's the party of the serpent, the party of the devil. And, it just happens to be this way. The Republican Party is their opposition. Because when you look at the Pledge of Allegiance, for which it stands one nation under God, we are a God-fearing republic. A Republican does not mean republic. We are a God-fearing republic. But prior to that, we was a Democratic republic until the Democrat wanted to preserve slavery. And the Republicans said, basically, you guys are getting rich and wealthy off free labor, and we got to bust this thing up. And if you did not know, it was a sum of 300,000 newly freed slaves that actually fought on the side of the Union to defeat the Democratic Dixiecratic South. Think about that. We got to have this conversation. So the greatest president of all time right now is a tie between Barack Obama and Trump. And like I said, this is how things happen. Okay. Trump's timing is perfect. Could you imagine if Donald Trump sat down and have a conversation with us? Okay. Nonpartisan independents, the blacks. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine if Donald J. Trump had this conversation and pretty much, we talked about no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, tax exemption for wage earners earning less than $150,000. Could you imagine a conversation with Trump? I can. Okay. And I can also imagine having a conversation, because if he has a desire, and as an egotistical man, I know he does have the desire to be the greatest president in American history. And if he wants to do that, a constitutional amendment will crown him. And when I say a constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment says slavery, no involuntary servitude. Okay. Involuntary servitude is slavery. Okay. So when you look at the prison system, the federal prison system, the prison systems, there's involuntary servitude in the prisons, meaning you got to get up and work, meaning you are a slave. Slavery is legalized and it's embedded in our criminal justice system. In my era, they were just rounding us up. And when they were doing it, the black race as a whole was supporting locking up people because they pretty much fell for the okie doke. And this is why I have an issue with Democratic elected officials, even the country trying to go get a documented gang member out of a foreign prison when the president of El Salvador was sitting right there with Donald Trump, and they asked him about letting him out. And what did he say? He said, I'm not going to smuggle a known gang member back into the United States. Knock it off. OK. And like I said, and contrary to popular belief, these terrorists, everybody coming to the table. And if you did not know, there's a 90-day freeze on it. The stock market has recalibrated and things are getting back to where it's supposed to be. But what I'm saying is we have an opportunity to do what our ancestors could not do. OK, do what Dr. King couldn't do. Do what Malcolm X could do, what the Black Panthers couldn't do. We have an opportunity to change the game. And the only way we could do this is sanctifying ourselves, and sanctification meaning separate ourselves from the two-party system, and more importantly, separate ourselves from the Democratic Party. Because when you look at the Pope of the world, OK, he's supposed to be the face of religion globally. OK, and now it's in question if he's going to hell or not, because Jesus said, say to you, that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. That's what Jesus said. And clearly, the Pope's righteousness was pretty much democratic. OK, he fell for the okie doke. He promoted an agenda, OK, and a progressive agenda that goes against God. OK. And then you have a sitting president, and Donald Trump on the first day in signed an executive order or executive action to just recognize male and female. But he's the bad guy. OK, he's the bad guy. He wants, born males to not play in female sports, but he's the bad guy. Okay. His party, the Republican Party, is talking about tax reform in the forms of no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security, which has been introduced. They're the bad guys. And this equation Pharisees. Okay. Because the scribes are the immoral, Sodom and Gomorrah. Do what you want to do. The atheists, the non-believers, the murderers, the killers, the pillagers. Okay, the disruptors. That's who they are. Because just like the Chinamen that got actually caught for destroying a Tesla dealership, think about that. It's the United States versus everybody. Why is a Chinaman here in America in black ops, arming and shooting up and destroying and vandalizing a Tesla dealership? A Chinaman. Think about this. So this is why we got to come together, and this is why the greatest president of all time, right now it's between Barack Obama and Trump. Okay. But Trump has an opportunity. And this is a message directly to Donald Trump. If you talk with us and sit down with us and have a conversation, Mr. President, okay, and discuss this constitutional amendment, okay, and in the form of the 28th Amendment, or to ratify the 13th Amendment. So if we want to ratify the 13th Amendment, meaning take the criminalization clause and stop investing in slavery, which is mass incarceration, you clearly would be the greatest president in American history. Because once you do that, now we can have a conversation about reparations. Now we can have a conversation about the Freedmen's Bank, when Abraham Lincoln put away $8 million back in 1865 for the newly freed slave. 8 million. So run that with interest today. You're talking about in the forms of trillion, which will pretty much clear America's debt. Think about that. Let's have this conversation. But our Democratic elected officials, their job is to destroy a human being when the word of God says it's not flesh and blood. It's principalities, evildoers in high places. So these evildoers in high places are sending these Democrats to El Salvador to go get documented gang members. And then our local news, our national news, is pretty much in support of. I sat back and I heard him say, oh, he has no convictions, meaning good. Okay. But in terms of a documented gang member, why would you document, put the gang stuff on your body, on your hands, on your knuckles and all of that? Why did they cover his hands up, okay, with hearts in a selfie that she took with him? But Donald Trump showed the picture in the White House the other day of the gang MS-13 on that man's hands. So like I said, I'm hating the gang player. Live your life. But as a black man who, 1 in every 3 black men, is going to spend some time in the prisons. Think about that. So we got some smoke. The Democrats don't love us. Democrats, we're their sacrificial lamb. And until we figure it out and get our minds right, we're going to continue to be their blood sacrifice. Because think about it. Look at the black men that's going down right now. Even Club Shay Shannon Sharp caught a case. Is in negotiations for Shannon Sharp is in negotiations for $100 million deal. But all of a sudden, Tony Busby, the person who's representing all the people against P. Diddy, has found a Jane Doe, and they're suing Shannon Sharp for $50 million on civil suit, no crime. And this is why we got to get to the president, because we need an executive order, meaning there cannot be a civil suit if there's no criminal lawsuit. If there was no crime committed, you cannot just sit back and just do this grab, because you have scribes, which are today's liberals, okay, that are so dirty, and they would basically, their job is to steal, kill, and destroy. They want to steal your money, kill your character, and destroy your life based on what they can prove in court. Think about that. Sharp ain't raped nobody. I read the whole case, and I will be doing a video about it this week. Like I said, I'm not an individual that just does it just because of, impulsive. Okay. I sit back and I study and I look at it, and when I videos together, okay, I try to make it make sense. Okay. And it's starting to make sense because Shannon Sharp responded, and she basically told him that she needs, $50,000, and that's $25,000 every booty cheek. And he put that in a text, and I got that information as well. Okay, let me see here. Somebody jumped in. Let me see here. Why? Come on, Jelly Juice. Put that comment back. Somehow it said you retracted that comment. I was about to read that comment. So listen, man, I'm in the comments right now. Let me see here. Let me see here. You much hook, line, and sinker. I got some religious focus in here. Matthew 7, 21, 23, and 23. Jesus replied, I never knew you. Get away from me. You break God's laws. Wow. And I got a strange feeling. That's what he going to say to the Pope. Because the Pope, like I said, for what he did and what he's doing, what he did, because it's past tense. Okay. Based on the word, it says it right here. Okay. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And based on what Ray put in the comments, let me see here. Matthew 7:21. I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. And in my Bible say ye worker of iniquities. So think about it. It's time to separate. We can't put our faith in no man. This is the key right now. If you don't get anything from this conversation today, we cannot put our faith in no man. We got to put our faith in God. Okay. It's not popular. It won't go viral. People won't even see it because they want to block it. But if you go out and you talk about all of the stuff going on, and I'm sure I got 1,000 people on right now. And if I talk about Big U's, the Rolling 60s indictment, if I talk about Shannon Sharp and Floyd Mayweather going broke, okay, we'll be viral. But that's not what I do. I'm not a clout chaser, and the only thirsty for is for God. Okay. Because with the Floyd Mayweather situation, they talking about he's bankrupt and all of these things. Come to find out, Floyd Mayweather put a team together to buy 10% of the New York Giants in the sum of $700 million. And once he started documenting and put that offer in, they froze his account. They basically want to see where he's getting that money from. Contrary to popular belief, because the black man is the blood sacrifice for the states of America, because we are still practicing slavery. Look at P. Diddy. Okay. Look what they're doing to Shannon Sharp. Okay. Look what they're doing. The TD Jakes and all of the black men. They want to basically destroy their character. Okay. And then put them all over the shade room and all these other social media posts. And then, it is what it is. So this is why we cannot be a part of what they got going on. We cannot be a part of what they got going on. Let me see here. Tina Robinson. There should be a jail time for women who lie about rape. I totally agree. But that's just when you're living in Sodom and you're living in a world. I mean, it is what it is, because, when I read that and I read what she's accusing Shannon Sharp of, it seems like, she was just, her feelings was hurt. She didn't say anything about him doing anything wrong to her. None of that. Okay. She's basically was just talking about how I'm in a relationship. Sometimes, if I'm in a relationship with a woman, I get upset and I say something that's offensive. She's talking about that's mental anguish and all that. And knock it off. Let me see here. Another one from Tina. You must also accept Jesus Christ as your savior. Jesus said, no man comes to the Father but by me. Absolutely. And this is why the question, not clickbait, but the question is is the Pope going to hell? Because Jesus said, for I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is the Pope's rule book. This is the only book that the Pope should be abiding by. But somehow, some way, failed to the scribes and Pharisees, and he has led God's people astray. And this is why we are doing what we're doing now. This is what we call the great sanctification, which means we're separating ourselves, because the Democratic Party it will never seize power again. Because when you have individuals that can even have a productive conversation or have an agenda, and the only thing that they could do is attack. The only thing that they could do is get loud. The only thing they could do is try to fight and slam tables and all of that, is because they have nothing good to say at all. Because in my mind, an elected official, especially a Democratic official right now, could pretty much calm the storm right now and says, like somebody from the Congressional Caucus, we could fix this. We could bring America together, by respecting Trump's presidency and going to bat for the working class. because no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on been introduced. We need to take this to a House floor. And before we do that, we need to add tax exemption for wage earners earning less than $150,000, which was spoke by Secretary Lutnick on 60 Minutes or Face the Nation on CBS. He basically spoke on that they're talking about, or entertaining the fact of tax exemption for wage earners earning less than $150,000. Also, abolishing capital gains tax, abolishing the death tax. Think about that. These are all movements that will benefit the working class solely. And when I say the working class, that includes the middle class. Because if you look at the tax bracket is 1% to a 37% threshold. If you make over $500,000, you paying taxes at 37%. So if you get $1 million or earned $1 million that year, you're rich, but you're not wealthy, you're paying $370,000 in taxes. That's crazy. That's crazy. And all of the, what's going on in the world, let's have these conversations. We got to have these conversations. And this is why, I do what I do. This is why we, the people, have seized power, okay? Because the Democratic has abandoned the people. They invested their whole game and put all money in with border and migrants. And to prove this fact, you have elected officials leaving the country, going to El Salvador to try to retrieve documents. And I've never seen a Democrat go to a county jail to demand the release of a documented gang member here in these United States. More importantly, they put bills and laws and legislation in place, voted in by the Democrats in modern history in the form of the 94 crime bill, 3 strikes and you out, and just went and rounded up as many people as they could. And in the 90s and early 2000s, prison voting was a thing because that's what they did to the black man. They want to destroy the black family. They want to get the black man out the household. Think about it. The welfare system is designed and predicated of taking the man out of the house. So the black nuclear family has been destroyed. Black men are not even marrying black women anymore. Okay. They rather go make a mulatto child with a white woman because the sisters pretty much new niggas. And when I say the new niggas, meaning the sisters, black women, are more ignorant than the men. Okay, you look at any reality TV, you go online, you look at Congress, the black are acting out. The black women are selling out. When I was coming up and as a black man, we were trained to be better than everybody. We was trained to be articulate. We was trained to be a head above shoulders and to do things with class. Okay, they trained us to be meek like Moses, to love, to be patient, slow to anger. And all the work that we put in, they put the sisters in control because the science of Willie Lynch, once you control the sister, you can control the black race. And look what's going on right now. And just what she put in the comments, Jasmine Crockett. So disrespectful. So disrespectful. I mean, come on. So disrespectful. And then you look at the black men, who are pretty much a part of the LGBTQ systems in terms of being gay, which, like I said, has nothing to do with it. But what I'm saying is, they are compromised because a man who loves God is not going to do anything against his character, against his moral values, and more importantly, against God. Now, I understand there's exceptions to the rules. When you got a family, you got to do what you got to do. But it comes a time where we got to pretty much get right with God and start doing what's right. This is what we got to understand. So when the Jasmine Crockett's get up there, and be so disrespectful and, calling white women flat butt, bleached blonde, understand that is good for the clicks. Okay. But what algorithm or who are you speaking to? You're speaking to the lowest of the lowest vibration. You're speaking to individuals that don't even love themselves. So this is why we have to separate ourselves and do what's right for the people. I mean, it may be uncomfortable, but keep fighting, keep standing in the gap, keep promoting righteousness, and you keep sharing with your people the truth, because the truth shall make us free. And there's no way we can move forward with a criminalization clause in the 13th Amendment. We need a ratification of the 13th Amendment to take the criminalization clause, because once we do that, then we can invest in education instead of investing in state, federal, and private prisons. State, federal prisons trade on Wall Street. Vanguard, the core prisons of America. These are private prisons, okay, that pretty much want people to be in prisons. And the major investors invest in these prisons, companies like BlackRock, okay, they invest in the music industry as well as the prison. So this is why, they will industry plant and have them talking kill, 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 murder, 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 and then gets killed and somebody murders. So now it's a 2-for-1. You got somebody in jail and you got somebody dead, but they didn't made you a little bit of money. And then think about the lowest vibration when it comes to our music. Megan Thee Stallion performed at a presidential campaign for Kamala Harris. So disrespectful. Even Sexy Red. Look how they're prostituting our black women. Look how they're getting our young babies involved. Because I've read a story that in China, the 6-year-olds are learning AI, artificial intelligence. What are we teaching our 6-year-old children? Okay, I seen a little girl, where them fans at? And I'm like, come on, I'm a spell, but you know where them fans at. See, this is, like I said, the joke's on us. So this is why we got to separate ourselves and figure out what we need to do as a people. This is why we got to do that. And like I said, I entertainment and all that other stuff, but today it's not about views. It's not about none of that. It's about my moral integrity, and it's about really having a conversation with the people. So it is what it is. So those of you who actually, could see this message, because I know this is not popular, they're not going to let them see this. But at the end of the day, there is a great separation, and God's people shall not perish due to the lack of knowledge. And if we're going to, fight for the people, because the concept is we the people. We're leaving the Democratic Party. We're not running to the Republican Party. We're classifying ourselves as nonpartisan independents, and we will do the work for the people, by the people, and build this working class coalition. So with that being said, let's have an amazing day. This is your man signing out of Better Black America TV. I'm Bushan Glover. Have an amazing day. Peace out.